In October 2017, China's national anthem law, which is designed to ensure proper respect for the country's national song, came into effect. It is now the subject of a bill in Hong Kong as legislators of the Special Administrative Region move to enact local laws to ensure its proper implementation. So what are the guidelines incorporated in the legislation? What are the reasons for setting rules surrounding performance of the national anthem? And what are the legal implications for Hong Kong under the one country, two systems policy? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Jiang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics and Edward Lehman, Managing Director of the law firm Lehman, Lee and Xu. We shall also speak via satellite to Robert Cab, Director of the Economist Corporate Network in Hong Kong. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. So, John and Edward, what's special about this law?
You know, it's special because, I mean, Hong Kong, one country, two systems, and it's always difficult to legislate people's activities, and it's always difficult to try to enforce what's considered to be insulting or what's considered to be not good taste, and that's what this law sets out to do. I mean, this law is not so unusual in as much as the national emblem and the flag also falls under the rubrics of the same type of law, and so now we're going to see it. In 2014, there was a lot of blowback, and the fans in Hong Kong have been fined for FIFA for disrespecting the song. So it was not even the Chinese government, but FIFA actually made a fine for the disrespect to the Chinese national anthem. So this could be arising from that, perhaps.
And your take?
I think national anthem is one of things like the stationary troop in Hong Kong, like the Constitution. These are things belonging to symbols of sovereignty. And I think this piece of legislation is long overdue. You know, it's a litmus test that China is exercising sovereignty over Hong Kong, even though we have a one country, two systems there. So this is a big deal. And I think a national anthem is something not only serves as a national symbol, but also, you know, has its own psychological impact on future generations. You know, people have a sense of pride, people have a sense of belonging every time they hear this song, every time they sing this song. So I think this is very important.
Let's imagine, let's expect what's going to happen in the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, because it's going to be submitted to the Legislative Council for deliberations for the first and second read.
Right.
Will the debates be very tough? Because opinions are quite divided among and between some of the lawmakers in the House.
You know, it is. I mean, in what we've seen over the last few years in Hong Kong, I mean, I think that the legislature has been very pro-Beijing, in my opinion, and those that were not pro-Beijing were actually asked to leave and were not able to take their seats. So it would be my guess, and again, we'll have other people on to talk about Hong Kong later, but
I'm afraid Edward has simplified the issue of encouraging pro-Beijing people to stay on and driving out those who are against Beijing. That's a typical American view. What do you think? That's black and white terms. Well, President Bush's black and white terms.
Well, there will be opposition. I'm pretty sure there will be opposition, but it doesn't matter actually. At the end of the day, you know, this thing has to pass, and if it's not going to be passed, it's going to be overridden by Beijing. So I think you know, this is an exercise, a process we have to go through. But hopefully, I think so far, from what I've read, I think the this legislation camp does have the votes. I'm pretty sure this is going to pass.
Well, I mean, the other thing is that once you have a law, and because it is a common law jurisdiction, we have another way of looking at it, which is the legislature they pass laws, policies, and regulations. The court then has to enforce those regulations. The police, which actually takes on a role much like the UK, they actually have a wide range on arresting people and not arresting people. And just so people know that what's been proposed is a 50,000 Hong Kong fine. Mm-hmm. So remember, it's 7.8 to the dollar, so it's about, you know, it's not a small amount of money. Mm-hmm. Then it's also could be up to 3 years imprisonment. There's a 2-year statute of limitations, and so that's quite a long period of time, meaning that they can bring an action to police if they do identify someone in a crowd. They could bring it up to 2 years from the time that it's brought. Do I think there will be a healthy debate? Yes, I do. Do I think that it will eventually pass? The answer is yes. How is it going to be enforced is what's more important, which is the judiciary actually going out and making law on those particular cases.
Look, here is something controversial, I'm afraid. at least that's something that has happened in the United States. For example, football players refuse to respect the national flag, and yet at the same time, that country, the United States of America, also respects freedom of speech. So there's obviously a conflict between the two things. Do you think this is likely to happen in Hong Kong, which is also a place where freedom of expression is highly respected and protected by the Constitution?
Well, there's even controversy over the interpretation of what does that mean when calling Kaepernick kneels down when national anthem is played. Some people say it's patriotism, right?
Yeah.
But of course, Donald Trump thinks it's a desecration of the national anthem, and he has some slurs wants to get rid of him out of the stadium. But regardless of this, I think the point is that in the U.S. this is not regarded as illegal. It's probably interpreted by some people, although supported by other people as well, that it was disrespectful of the national anthem. So this is not a legal issue. It's more of sort of a moral issue, I guess, right?
Right.
But here in China, we have different laws. I think it's very clear.
But I'm afraid in Singapore and Thailand, the punishment could be very, very tough, very severe.
Right. Yeah.
If you have desecrated the royal family, symbols of the royal family, man, that punishment could be.
Absolutely. I mean, even mentioning, with the former king, for example, you could not mention anything negative about the king in public, and that was a crime. So that does happen. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Robert Cab, who's standing by in our studio in Hong Kong for his analysis about the feedback, the local feedback towards the alleged legislative work. So what do you think would be the impact of legislating this into law, Robert?
Well, it's already elicited quite a lot of controversy, Young Ray, as some of your comments referenced. So, one of the things Hong Kong has enjoyed since even its establishment as a colonial territory has been freedom of speech. And effectively, that's being limited yet again, in this case, with the national anthem law. I don't think there are many people who disagree with the spirit of inculcating more pride in being part of China, but there is a lot of controversy about if this is the right way to do it.
John, to my knowledge, since 1997, spectrum of public opinions remains divided over the implementation and the spirit even of one country, two systems, with a lot in Hong Kong arguing for two systems, but pretty weak on the principle of one China. In this case, do you think what Robert says about the controversy could have some ring of legitimacy for the locals in Hong Kong?
I think in general, people in Hong Kong are entitled to their opinions. They are entitled to preserving their way of life. But there's a bottom line here. The bottom line is that they're not supposed to touch upon the very fundamental, the core issues and things that are of national concern to China, to people on the mainland. And unfortunately, I have to say that the national anthem is one of these things. As I said, it's like a
non-negotiable.
It's non-negotiable. I mean, it's a thing related to the sovereign rights of this country, and there's no dispute about this. So I think.
Do we have any international law to explain this sort of controversy? Because this might be an issue of cultural differences. In Oriental countries, laws are very tough about the respect for sovereignty and the authority of the rulers.
No, I agree. These are symbols that represent the People's Republic of China, not to be taken lightly and to be taken very seriously. I agree laws, policies, and regulations need to be enforced and they need to be respected. But yes, I do think that there's a difference. And I think that, again, we're a civil law system in mainland China, okay, common law system in Hong Kong. And I think but I think from an enforcement standpoint, it's just very difficult, because what's going to happen is the unintended circumstances. I mean, I agree with Professor Zhang, and I'm not trying to make this black and white. I do believe it should be respected. I think that the unintended consequences are going to be that this is going to be a flashpoint at everything that goes on around the world for the national anthem, and it leaves itself open to this controversy.
Let me go back to Robert. There's no question that Hong Kong boasts of the world-class law enforcement personnel, and therefore, what do you think would happen in a similar case like a football match, football competition, where the national anthem could be booed by soccer fans, like what happened about 2 years ago, do you think these guys would be singled out and they would be brought to justice according to the law that's going to be enacted anyway in Hong Kong?
Well, that's certainly the concern, and I should point out that one of the other controversial aspects of the law as it's been proposed is that prosecutors can investigate up to 2 years. So that pretty much puts the people who were filmed booing the national anthem previously on the spot. And there's even been a legal debate here in Hong Kong that if you, for example, desecrate the flag, the period for investigation is only 6 months. So it seems to be going to extraordinary lengths to protect this particular symbol. And the further argument, of course, is that can you force people to be patriotic? It's that the act actually is contrary to building genuine, truly sincere patriotism. It's making people forced, to be patriotic, which is not sincerely patriotism.
Well, the issue of patriotism is, of course, in the blood of many peoples. So, Edward, now you're a man of a legal background, a lawyer, of course. Well, what should be done to balance the intent of the national anthem law with Hong Kong's common law system?
Right. I think that that's where it becomes very difficult. So the common law system, I mean, in what Robert Capa was mentioning before, that there should be so-called freedom of speech. Under the British system, they don't really fully have freedom of speech. The United States does. I mean, UK, which is what they've taken over from, they have very strong libel laws. They have very strong laws about speech. And so that it's not exactly the same as the First Amendment, which allows freedom of speech. You can tread on a flag, that's okay. You can disrespect the Star-Spangled Banner, which is our national anthem. But so trying to balance those things with the common law, the problem again is a small legal body. So you've only got about something like 5,000 or 6,000 barristers, solicitors. You've got only about 500 or 600 barristers. Those are the people who can actually present people in court. And I think from just trying to get the numbers of people, if you look at the number of people who attend a sporting event, and to try to enforce this over 2 years, over 6 months, whatever the heck it is, it's logistically going to be a nightmare for them to try to do that. And I'm not sure that the resources should be used in that particular manner. I do think it should be respected. I think it's a bit like St. Ignatius Loyola said about the Jesuits. He said, give me a child up until the time of he's like 10 years old and I'll show you the man. And I think to a certain extent teaching it in textbooks, I think showing people respect on how to behave, and we had the discussion before the show began, how does one behave? Do you stand up straight? I mean, part of the rules is that you cannot use you cannot change the lyrics to the song, you cannot use it on advertising, you cannot use it at inappropriate events, and it's sort of limited as to what it can be done at. So these are all interpretations under the common law system, because it means common law, common sense about whether you should be arrested for that would be the police, and then how it's to be interpreted under the legal system.
John and Robert, here is yet another important question. Some opposition figures in Hong Kong say that the draft bill has failed to clearly define acts of insulting the national anthem. I wonder if you guys have studied the details of the legislation very carefully.
I think the language in the legislation itself is actually quite vague, in my opinion, about what acts, as some of you described, are indeed violating this law, or some other acts are not violating this law. So that leaves the law enforcement agency some room to interpret this piece of legislation and have some leeway over what to prosecute and what not to prosecute. So I think at least the legislation itself probably deliberately keep it vague so that it has some room of maneuver when it comes to enforcement. I think the language itself doesn't really go into really detailed description of every possible act, and I think deliberately. So that is.
But I think what you're going to see under common law is exactly, those will be further defined under common law. So, for example, 2 years ago when all this stuff was happening, people were facing, their backs were facing the, were facing the flag, backs were facing the music. That might, then it would be interpreted under case law. Is that acceptable? Or is it sitting on one, is it on one knee? Is it sitting down? These types of things will then become part of the law, which is case law. We call it stare decisis, and it'll be how does one behave, and that's how we do it in the United States and how it's done in the United Kingdom and in Hong Kong.
Robert, what do you think of the alleged loopholes to be taken advantage by lawmakers or the media in case of violating this national anthem bill in Hong Kong? What do you think of the wording?
Well, I think that's another big part of the controversy, actually, at least the way I've been hearing criticisms of the legislation as it's currently proposed is exactly that vagueness that John was referring to. Yes, you could argue that, okay, that's good because it makes it seem less stringent, perhaps. But the worry is, of course, any prosecutor, any judge can decide to interpret this, and as you know, the comments were just made, case law builds upon interpretations of statutes. So it means it opens up a door for doing all sorts of things, particularly politically motivated. What if you wanted to go after opposition figures? What if the prosecutor's office had it out for certain members of opposition parties and decided to check all sorts of records to see if they could find back to 2 years examples of them disrespecting, I mean, perhaps not even standing up at a legislative session for the national anthem. I mean, that's a problem with the vagueness.
Robert, how much do you know about education in Hong Kong concerning the use of some of the symbols about sovereignty at the ceremony? Now, do you believe that prior to the handover in 1997, the Chinese authorities of the mainland had obviously underestimated the frustrations, if not resistance, from the locals about the, the sovereignty itself?
That seems to be the case. I think it's also part of a shift that's occurred. As I look back on 1997, that period, there was actually a lot of enthusiasm for reunification with the mainland, and you didn't quite have the controversies that emerged later. And I think it was exactly like I was mentioning, this sense of enforcement. I think there's, let's just put it this way, part of the cultural difference in Hong Kong is the freedom to choose how you want to think and how you want to act. And I don't think anyone would disagree that patriotism is, in the sense of not a nationalistic or jingoistic, but a kind of sincere form of love of country, is a good thing, and it is a moral virtue. But when it's enforced on people, they start to react. So there have been, actually demonstrations against patriotic education. It is, to a certain degree, introduced into schools here, but it remains controversial. The way you teach it, how much Mandarin has to be required. I mean, that's one of the other controversies about the anthem. What if you can't sing well in Mandarin? Could you be prosecuted for not singing well in Mandarin? And by the way, if it was judged on a matter of singing skills, I would definitely be in danger, because I am not much of a singer.
We understand the concerns of Americans.
But Robert doesn't hold a Hong Kong passport. You don't have to say.
Robert, I agree with you. I mean,
No,
I'd be the same.
maybe I'm
I'd be the
safe.
same thing.
Yeah.
You'd be
Maybe
in
you do
trouble.
have a Hong Kong passport.
But keep in mind, gentlemen, what CGTN did to get rid of the Chinese influence on the island of Taiwan, to diminish and reduce whatever cultural roots concerning the relationship between Taiwan and the mainland. So, do you believe lawmakers in the National People's Congress, or the top legislature of Beijing, must have kept in mind this bitter lesson that they drew from Taiwan, where textbooks failed to talk about traditional Chinese culture, so that the majority of the young Taiwanese today don't think they are Chinese because of the education that they got from the textbooks that the DPP, the pro-secession political force, currently the ruling party in Taiwan, did to desecrate, this very important part of the Chinese culture. Do you think similarly, in Hong Kong, for example, the Chinese lawmakers and those in Hong Kong do keep in mind this lesson?
Well, I think lawmakers on the mainland certainly have that perspective. They learn the lesson from what's happening currently in Taiwan. But also, I tend to agree with what Robert has said. Sometimes patriotism is something very difficult to, forcefully implant in people's mind. It's something, that you gain by yourself, something you experience it, something that you have to go through by yourself. I think, at least from my interpretation of this piece of legislation, it's really about sovereignty issue. This is national anthem is different. We're not trying to educate people about Chinese culture through this. I mean, that might be a side product, but at least the primary concern is that this is something that's very different. We have to
education through the curriculum or textbook is one thing. Let's put it aside for a moment. What about a ceremony before the class begins every morning for students of primary school? Are they required to salute the national anthem, I mean the flag-raising ceremony?
Well, I mean, the people in Hong Kong were brought up like this. They used to sing, what is that? God Save the Queen, right? Yeah, so, you know, they're used to this. It's not something new here. And other than the song is replaced by a new song, right? So I'm not thinking that the...
Let me go back to Robert. What did you see in Hong Kong? Such a flag-raising ceremony for the local schools. Is it a requirement, for example, after 1997, students, in this case, are required to salute both the national anthem and the national flag of China, as well as the flag of the Hong Kong SCR government at the same time?
I must confess, I don't have a lot of expertise here because I don't have young children living with me and my wife in Hong Kong. But my understanding is that, yes, for the Hong Kong public schools, there are flag-raising ceremonies. Those are done without a lot of issue. I think where there's a little bit of concern with this particular piece of legislation is the international schools. And again, that gets back to, well, international students who aren't citizens of Hong Kong or the mainland in any shape or form, why should they be required to comply? And
but
again,
do you think there would be a kind of exception
yeah.
for students of international schools?
Well, that, again, as I understand it, isn't clearly laid out, and so there are international schools waiting to hear about that. I would presume that's probably going to be something they will do. However, as you know, just like in the mainland, so many of these international schools are actually populated with mainland Chinese students. So, again, I don't know if there'll be a clear answer there, but apparently the international schools are likely to be exempted.
You know, just to digress on that point, I mean, in the United States, so when I was growing up, and since 1956 actually was the year that it was instituted, is that students, or at least that as far as I knew, everyone was to say the Pledge of Allegiance every day. Now, you don't have that. That's not the Star-Spangled Banner, which is our national anthem. Was written by a lawyer, by the way, Francis Scott Key. It's actually the song, it's an old drinking song, an old British drinking song, actually. So he changed the lyrics, and then that became our national anthem. But just to digress on it, is that everyone, whether they're a legal alien, illegal alien, immigrant, whatever they are, that goes to a school in the United States is supposed to say the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of the day, at least at primary school. That was the way it was. And so, I mean, just to Robert's point, is that I don't know what the international students are going to do or not do. But I mean, one demonstrates that in school. But again, I think it should be done through education. It's very difficult when you go to Colin Kaepernick, that's the NFL player who was taking the knee. Some could say taking a knee is a religious moment. It's getting down. It's showing subservience to the government, to the flag. Others can say, well, it's disrespectful because you're sitting down, and that's where the difficulty.
Well, regional integration in the greater area, Bay Area, by law is one thing, but economic integration through the building of infrastructure is quite another. With the completion of a mega project like the bridge that connects Hong Kong, Macau with the mainland, that's fantastic, a milestone, fantastic. Do you think this issue of national anthem could help promote the sense of national identity, which eventually may lay the groundwork for further economic integration, Robert?
I mean, actually, perhaps it could. There are, as I understand it, psychological studies that say if you teach people to repeat things, or the idea even in esoteric religions, mantras, repeating something helps you focus in on the message of what you're repeating. So thereby inculcating things like the national anthem or other patriotic education to the greater Bay Area could serve to further facilitate integration. I think there's a case to be made for that.
Well, do you think the issue of patriotism could help facilitate the flow of goods, human resources, ideas, values, services?
I honestly do. I mean, well, I think there's a few things. I think number one is I absolutely agree that by the physicality act that it helps you to behave. I mean, whether you're doing it as a national anthem or you're saying I'm going to get up early and I'm going to try to organize my day. The second thing is that I think it's also a symbol that the common law system is actually overburdened and represented as far as the legal profession is concerned, it's almost impossible. So to a certain extent, it's frozen up. The Court of Appeals is delayed. The getting to court and getting a date is delayed. The prosecution is delayed a lot. And I think that to a certain extent, this is the beginning of the end of what's the common law system, the way it's administered there. And so I think the greater Bay Area is going to be a better alternative, a quicker alternative with regards to labor and arbitration disputes, with regards to a whole bunch of things that are done in a more matter-of-fact way that have the personnel to do it. So I do believe that the integration is going to happen, and maybe not specifically as a result of this law, but I think this is going to add to it.
There is a sizable population of up to 18 million in this Greater Bay Area. That includes Hong Kong, Macau, Guangdong, Shenzhen. Guangzhou and Shenzhen, by the way, are so-called first-tier cities where dynamics of the manufacturing industry is very impressive for much of the past 40 years. So what do you think of the mutual complementarity? People in the mainland could also learn a lot from the rule of law in Hong Kong, if not in Macau.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think integration is already happening. This respect of whether this national anthem thing is going on or not. If you go to Hong Kong, if you go to Canton, the border crossing between Shenzhen and Hong Kong is actually pretty easy. And there's a lot of commute between. Actually, there are kids who live in Shenzhen and go to school in Hong Kong and come back at night. So integration is already going on. And today, I think Hong Kong is indeed becoming more and more Chinese, as opposed to being British. So this is already happening, and I think in the future it's further going to happen. And also I think I want to make a point that one country, two system I don't think it's going to stay there forever. And I'm venturing to say this. It's a step towards a eventual unification between Hong Kong and the mainland. We have
50 years since 1997, according to Deng Xiaoping, our late senior leader.
Well, I mean, for the moment, yeah. So this is about unification. So I think all these things would have to happen, integrated at various levels. And obviously, there's such an important symbol, the national anthem, has to happen sooner or later. And I'm actually a little bit sorry to say that it's long overdue. It should have happened some time ago.
As an expert of legal studies and a lawyer, Edward, do you think rule of law will certainly help deepen the integration? I mean, market economy, by the way, and fundamentally should be the issue of rule of law, about fair play, national treatment, leveling the playing field.
Absolutely. Listen, my whole life I voted with my feet. I'm dedicated to the advancement of rule of law. I think it's the way that we as human beings that are functioning in this country and other countries around the world to be able to do it in an equitable way. I mean, it's not always administered the same way everywhere, but that doesn't mean that one can't always work at it. And I think that the lawyer profession needs to be expanded as much as it can in that area and elsewhere throughout China.
Well, obviously there are big differences between concepts such as patriotism, rule of law, colonialism, common law, for example. Yeah, I mean, in the age of globalization, it is indeed very difficult to have a blanket implementation of a certain law that's authorized and imposed by the lawmaking body in Beijing. In the case of Hong Kong, that means a lot for the future, prosperity and stability. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.